Hi, we're Oxygen Conservation, and this is the Shoot Room Sessions.
Did you see my lovely character assassination in the Daily Mail last week?
No.
Well, depending on your viewpoint, it was either a character assassination or a love letter from a male journalist.
All press is good press.
Well, a good third of it was just related to my physical appearance, which was quite weird.
Oh.
Yeah.
Could have been a bad thing though.
That literally.
Could be worse.
So my wife reads this and goes, this journalist is a barbell enthusiast, which the single best joke on that was Dan claiming that was the fish. So Dan claiming I was really to barbell the fish. So I'm not. Right, Sophie, it's all about you. Let's do your podcast. We're going with the soft roll into the podcast. Sophie, welcome to the Shoot Room.
Thank you for having me.
Can you tell people who you are and what you do?
My name is Sophie Pavelle. I'm an author and a science communicator, and I live in Devon.
Nice. What is your career contents page? Where did you, in fact, we can broaden that to a life contents page.
Oh dear.
Where did you grow up? How did it start? How did you become who you are today?
So I was actually born in America. My dad's American. My parents were both in the Navy. And my brother and I were born in the Deep South in Georgia. I know I don't sound like I've lost my Southern accent. We moved to England when we were very young. I was 4, my brother was 6.
Do you remember any of the US?
It's one of those things where it's very difficult to know whether my memory is like through the lens of a home video, whether it's a genuine memory. I truly believe I have fragments of memory, but my brother will tell me that I don't. Anyway, I feel a very strong connection to the States, and I still have lots of close family over there, and we've been back recently a few times, and I feel very lucky to have that dual nationality. But we moved to Devon when we were very young. Our mum's British, and I very much consider Devon home. We moved from deep southern suburbia to a tiny fishing village on the River Exe called Lympstone, and we grew up suddenly with the river literally on our doorstep, to the point we lived in an apartment. It was damp, it was tiny. I'm pretty sure it gave my brother asthma, or at least helped it manifest. But we went from having kind of tarmac and big manicured lawns and spaces as our garden to no garden, but we had a shoreline. And we were on the river to the point where at high tide and in a storm, the water would lap up against the window. And so that was my introduction to England, to nature. We used to bury treasure on the beach, go crabbing, do all the kind of idyllic childhood stuff. And we didn't have much money. We never went abroad when we came to England. Our parents were very much like, we need to explore our home, our island, before we give other countries our time. And so our holidays were windswept camping trips to Wales and parts of Snowdonia and Scotland and the Lake District and Cornwall. And we really got to know places that so many of my friends at school had never been to. They were going abroad, they were going to Spain and France and things, and my brother and I would be really envious and be like, oh, why can't we go abroad? And our parents would be like, well, we're going to Wales. So our introduction to the environment was very much an immersive, like, no such thing as bad weather. We will go regardless, whether it's windy, rainy, sunny, boiling hot, whatever. And we're so lucky in Devon that we have a national park on our doorstep, or 2 actually. We've got Exmoor and Dartmoor. Growing up, going on the coast path to the beach and just kind of doing all the things that we weren't able to do in America. And I think that was a huge part of our parents' decision to move here was, well, what kind of childhood do we want for our children? And Devon really offered that. So my immersion into nature and adventure was very much an experiential one, and it still is today. And I'm so grateful to my parents for kind of making that such a hugely important part of my upbringing and lifestyle. And so, yeah, that was kind of where the interest began. I never was one of those children who wanted to know like what bird was singing, whose kind of tracks were they in the mud. I had an inquisitive mind, but it was not to know who was there in terms of what species were there. It was just the thrill of the chase of just, well, it makes me feel good, so I'm just going to go there and do that. And so yeah, I think a lot of people assume that because you're a sort of a nature writer or a science communicator, you know all Latin, you know all the special words, you know all the species, you know what birds singing. I really don't. And to be honest, I don't necessarily have a desire to rectify that. I feel like my skills lie elsewhere. But I did study zoology at university. But that was more...
Because you had a clear view of where you wanted to go with that, or it was just a thing that...
No, not at all. I was one of those people who, and I kind of feel like I still am, I was always envious of people who knew what they wanted to do.
Does anyone really know? People say they do, but often it's like retrospective logic.
Maybe.
Except like doctors, dentists, architects who have like a 7-year run at something.
Yeah.
And it's so formulated. I think most other people just make it up backwards.
Well, did you know what you wanted?
I still don't know what I want to do. I mean, this didn't exist. Like natural capital as a thing didn't exist. I wanted to be a professional athlete and I just was no good at any of the sports, sadly. So tried lots and tried to succeed and yeah. And then loved data, loved sport, loved the environment. Whitewater kayaking was my passion. And somehow, we literally just recorded with Kat Bruce, the amazing founder of Nature Metrics. And she describes that exact thing of like 10 different aspects of her life coming together and a company emerging from that. That's what oxygen conservation is. Environmental stuff, big data systems, high performance culture from sport. That is our business. So no, I had no idea.
Really unique. Yeah, I mean, my brother is an exception, I guess, to that, and that he always wanted to be a doctor from day one.
Yeah.
And now he's a doctor. And I was always frustrated at people who would say, oh, isn't it exciting? You don't know what you want to do. Isn't it amazing? World's your oyster. And I was just like, oh, so boring. I just would quite like some direction, please. But I, as you were suggesting with yourself, like had so many different interests. And that really was, I think, a blessing because it kind of took the pressure off a little bit because I didn't really know what I was good at. I knew what I enjoyed. I knew what I didn't like.
What were some of those early interests?
Oh, loads, like sport, hiking. I really wanted to be a vet for a few years and I did all the work experience to do veterinary medicine. And then suddenly I was doing like a day of surgery with vets in Bristol and they said, we don't need more clinicians, we need more communicators to communicate what we're doing, the environmental impacts of what we're doing. And I was like, communicators? And so I did that for a bit. I was interested in physiotherapy. I had lots of knee surgery growing up. And so I had exposure to lots of physiotherapy. So I thought, oh, that seems like a good job. Maybe I'll do that.
How many knee surgeries?
I've had 3. I've had 2 huge ones.
Me too.
3 smalls. Really?
Yeah, knee surgery top trumps.
Yeah. Oh, it's a killer to recover from, isn't it?
Yeah.
Hurts a lot.
Yeah.
But wait, look at us now. But yeah, so and I did work experience in law. I thought, well, I like the environment, I want to help it, maybe I could like go into
I did law for a year at uni.
environmental law.
I wasn't clever enough, rich enough.
Oh, it was
to be
not my
successful.
scene. I did 1 taste a day at like a massive hotshot law firm in Bristol and in the coffee breaks very quickly and I was like, this is not for me. I was like, they're all talking about their uncles and dads who are in the magic circle and I just want to be outside and I had to buy a suit for this and I was like, I'm so uncomfortable. But yeah, and then a lot of my family's military and so I was very interested and there's part of me that still really is, in a way, interested in joining the military.
Needs help.
Well, this is the thing, I interviewed for the Navy but I had only just recovered, it took me 2 years to recover from the first surgery.
What was the first injury?
It was kind of really boring. It wasn't an injury. It was just the way my knees grew. My kneecaps kind of sat anatomically in the wrong place. So they had to be sort of detached and then pulled down and reattached. But
I never met anyone with interesting kneecaps before.
well, hello.
Mine, I was playing football in Los Angeles, pushing
As you
against
too.
bigger boys. I spun 360 degrees and my foot stayed where it was.
Oh no.
And my knee just blew up.
Oh,
Yeah.
man.
So that was one. Then no cartilage in it anymore. So at some point, I get to go back and have a synthetic cartilage put in it. But they say you have to learn to walk again at that point because they have to move your leg apart and put it back.
Yeah,
So
well,
I'm holding off that as long as
it's not,
possible.
it's not fun.
I can't kneel.
It's quite humbling.
But yeah.
Should we compare scars later?
Okay.
But yeah, so interviewed for the Navy, and unfortunately I was advised to try again later because of all the medical stuff. So that was a forced pause on that idea, but I couldn't shake what that vet had told me when I did that work experience. If we need,
Well, and if you think about all those different things you've tried,
yeah,
you'd communicated with such an array of people and backgrounds and experiences. So you were collectively building up language and data, but you were building your own internal large language model for how to speak to a wide range of people.
I guess so. Yeah, I was meeting all these different people with no vested interest or like personal goal to get anything from them. I was just so grateful for the experience, and I cannot stress enough how valuable work experience is, because it can confirm what you like, but I think more importantly it can tell you what is not for you and what you don't like, and that's very useful.
So we struggle with this question at the moment, right? So we get so we have a paid internship program, which I appreciate is distinct from work experience. We had 2,000 applicants this year for our intern program. Two of the amazing, successful people are sat in the corner with us right now. Round of applause, thank you, Ben.
Well done.
We get a lot of requests to people who just want to work for us for free or do work experience. The problem in the environment sector is, for decades, people have been taken advantage and actually employed as work experience and been asked to do work and not paid for it. So I worry now, if we do welcome people in for what is genuinely work experience, we're just going to get a huge amount of criticism and negativity because of that. The flip side is, I'm also aware we're not giving some people opportunities that we could to shadow things and get work experience. So it's really hard on that. I don't know the right answer. So what's your perspective of how do we do that, but communicate it in the right way so we don't have to deal with a huge amount of negativity and criticism?
It's a tricky one, but I think there's a certain point when you're either trying to get into an industry like conservation or change careers, so you've gone from one to the other.
That's happening way more and more.
Yeah,
Our interns, we had like directors of property companies and former lawyers and things, people who just want to change.
Yeah, people are doing 180s now, and it's really exciting. And this is a really important time for people to be looking to the conservation sector as a viable alternative, or almost like an offer of service. But obviously everyone needs money, everyone wants to be paid. But I think offering short bouts of work experience, whether it's a week, a couple of days, 2 weeks, that is unpaid, but the value that offers to the person participating in the experience is priceless. Because either it says, this is for me, I'm absolutely sure I want to get into this, and this has been something I can add to my CV, reference in an interview, reflect on, or equally valuable, it could be like, oh, actually, that's not what I thought it was. I'm just going to park that idea for a bit and try something else. So work experience is hard because you don't want to feel like you're exploiting someone's time and skill set, but it's their choice as to whether they take it. And if you're transparent about the fact of, look, we can't pay you for a week, but we can offer you a structured itinerary and a timetable that's as varied as possible to give you as broad a picture of the job and the organisation, that's amazing. Job interviews are so hard in the conservation sector because on the one hand, organisations are saying it's all hands on deck, we need more people than ever, helping fight the good fight. But yet I interviewed for, I think, nearly about 25 different jobs in the sector.
Wow.
When I graduated from university, I got a first class degree in zoology from Bristol. I got a distinction and a master's in science communication. I tried and failed for 25 jobs in the environment sector. And it was always, and it was like a variety of jobs, some comms, some like assistant jobs, very, very low level. I was just desperate to get a foot in the door. And it was always a classic of, we were really impressed with your interview, but you didn't quite have enough experience. And I was like, well, I'm never going to get that if someone doesn't give me a chance.
Yeah.
And so I worked in retail right the way up until COVID to fund my growing portfolio of working for free in the sector, doing pieces, like writing pieces for free, doing more work experience until Beaver Trust gave me a chance. And that was kind of my first proper job.
When you look back at that period, how do you feel about that? Like, do you resent the fact that was the nature of how you had to get into the sector?
In a way, yeah, because I think it makes it really tough for young people. And I went to a grammar school that specialises in science. And I didn't go there because of that. I went there because my brother was already there and it was a great school and my parents couldn't afford any other option than a state school. And I feel very lucky that I went there. But even then, so this was like 15 years ago, they never promoted careers in conservation as a viable career. It was medicine, engineering, dentistry, veterinary.
Yeah.
So going to study zoology was seen as like a lovely thing of like, oh, that's lovely. You'll learn about animals and stuff. And then
yeah.
And the quoted statistic was like 70% of zoology graduates go on to work in finance because they're good at statistics. I'm terrible at statistics, so I don't know where that came from. But
that narrative about anything environmental based did not lead to a job or a
no, or it's like, oh, well, you can, that would be a lovely thing to sort of dabble in as a hobby or a volunteer.
That's literally what I meant last night about. So I used to advise people against geography degrees for the same reason, because it literally used to mean, well, you're unemployable.
Yeah, or you'll be a
Go
teacher.
be an accountant or a teacher.
Yeah. But it's so damaging to continue with that narrative because you've got young people who are growing up seeing the world on fire, glaciers melting, doom and gloom news, climate change, everything's going wrong.
And I think it is different now. So we're getting, again, people in the room who are getting the top firsts out of Oxford and Cambridge. And on that 2,000 applicants, we had 50 people with Oxbridge firsts, distinctions at Masters. We had international athletes applying for an internship in the because they're like, and these are people that before would have been straight into a big five consultancy, would have been straight into a law firm, but now they want to be in the environment sector, which is amazing.
So we need to support that by being as accommodating as possible and trusting people's passion. I think that's really underestimated. I think more people are like employers are valuing world experience, so travel. I think decisions.
I read a CV
to the
bottom
other.
up. So the first thing I read on a CV is like the bottom half. What have you achieved? What have you done? What have you? If you've got,
it's more personal, that bit.
Because, and then you look up and go, okay, academically, are we qualified? Are we there? Because also we're trying to go through 2,000 CVs for this process. Like, we're advertising for a new full-time photographer. By the time we started recording this morning, it isn't publicly advertised yet. The skeleton of it's on our website. We've had 55 applicants. We haven't posted the job on LinkedIn. 75 applicants,
75?
and it's not published yet.
Yeah.
So we advertised and got a wonderful PA, and we had 350 applicants for that job because people want to be in the sector. But I look bottom up, and if I see international sport, high level music, Gold Duke of Edinburgh Award, something that required you to suffer to achieve in whatever the thing it was, then, run a marathon in 3 hours, whatever it is that's amazing. Because then if that person wants to apply it to a place, they can.
Yeah.
So, whereas my experience of getting into the sector was not dissimilar to the one you described. The reason I asked about whether you resented it is because you had to go above and beyond and work like mad to get in, but you beat that system and you created an opportunity and a niche for yourself in spite of that. So it's really interesting. One argument is, well, the cream rose to the top in that scenario because you found your own route versus do we make it easier for everybody else, or is it just that the best climb anyway?
I think it's really interesting that you reference sport so much. And
some people say it's dull, so thank you, I appreciate that.
No, I think it's really interesting because I relate to it a lot because I was never particularly amazing at sport at school, but it's because I didn't really enjoy any of the sports there. The kind of sport that I liked was more endurance based and like grueling. So like solo through hikes and backpacking and long, hard, difficult cycles and adversity training in bad weather and hard swims and things like that, where you are your only way of reaching the end point. And I think maybe that's where the kind of attraction to the military comes from, and I've kind of been in that environment, I guess, growing up, or just know people who do that, and I'm really admire the strength and resilience that you have to have in your character to do that. And I think I've done a few big expeditions on my own that have required that determination and that focus, and I think maybe through that has allowed me to break through the system a bit, maybe, and kind of just persist, and I knew the passion would drive me through, but the kind of the nature of it being a kind of endurance thing. But what frustrates me about the conservation sector is that the way the environment is now, it shouldn't require that to get you opportunities in a way. But I don't know. I think it's evolving in the right way, but it's really difficult. And I think it's great that there are companies like you who are offering those opportunities and are very welcoming to people of all backgrounds. But
Haven't got room for them all.
You haven't got room for them all, and it's certainly not the way that the NGO sector is set up.
No.
To welcome talented graduates.
They're almost scared of it.
Yeah.
They're almost scared of talent because the narrative used to get in the public sector. So I worked with the government for 9 years, and they literally feared talent because they're like, oh, they're not going to be very easy to manage, and they might only be here 10 minutes because they're really talented. They'll get promoted. I'm like, good. Good. Have someone who's there 3 months. Let them be wonderful. Then let them be brilliant somewhere else. But that was so counterintuitive to, but if we spend way longer doing this, then we can do less work and make it last longer. And that's the problem with the whole environment sector in general, and why communicators, and we'll come on to where your love of that comes from, really. But communicating what the environment sector can be, telling better stories. I mean, the biggest problem climate and the environment got is a marketing issue. People can't engage with it. And when you think about the environment sector, most people think about a badly drawn picture of a tree, a badger, or a retiree planting a tree on a Sunday at the National Trust. And that's not exciting or engaging, or like, no one wants to run towards that and be part of it.
Yeah.
Whereas over the last 3-ish years, I think that's changed dramatically.
Yeah, totally.
Did you always write? Was language a thing that was always a feature of what you did, or is that something that's come later in life?
I think I have. It's always been a part of my life, I think, but without realizing it. So being in this room with you and talking about writing and books and stuff was never part of my plan. Writing was never part of my idea of what I might do. And so it's always a constant surprise to me to be reflecting on it. But now that I have been and have been sort of encouraging myself to, writing has always been there. So I was a child who never really listened to music, even though I played instruments. I listened to story tapes, always. I would go into my room and I'm old enough to have had cassette story tapes. I'd flip them over and wind them up. And
what was the one you wore out as a kid? What was
all of Enid Blyton, every single one. Just any of them, I've listened to all of them a million times, to the point where I could recite them. And even if I was going into my room to get changed, I'll put on a story tape for those 5 minutes. And I think it was a comfort. I think it was escapism. I just loved stories, and I was a very shy child, and I wasn't outgoing socially at all. And so that was my happy place, was listening to stories. And from then, I used to write diaries when I was little, and I still write a diary now, just when I can remember it in the evening, just reflecting, even if it's just oh, this is what I did, this is what I ate, this is what someone said, ha ha ha, or not. Just that act of correspondence and corresponding with the page, not with anyone in particular, I think was always a habit. And so when I was doing my master's and we had a module in scientific writing, and it introduced to me for the first time, instead of writing for an exam or a piece of coursework, it was writing as an act of translation between, here's a science paper talking all about, I don't know, marine mammal acoustics and how that might be damaged with renewable energy construction. A real thing, a real issue. Please translate it to be digestible for a kind of an audience who might read the Daily Mail or the Guardian or Facebook or whatever. And so I really relished that challenge because it was like, okay, here's a really sciencey, dull but interesting paper. How can we make it exciting? What are the things that people need to know? And what's the call to action? And so that was where the sort of challenge of science communication became really exciting for me. And then I started to just, we had to create a portfolio for coursework. And then I did a 2-week work experience placement at Country Farm magazine. And I got to like write for their website and do some newsy bits. And I remember how exciting it was to just see something I'd written about, like top 5 places to go to see dolphins this summer in England, and seeing that published on their website. And but never, even in those moments, did I consider it would be anything more than that. So and then the book opportunity sort of came about by chance in the first instance. So
What does chance mean?
chance, what does chance mean? So at the time I mentioned that I was working in retail, I was still living at home, I was trying to get as much experience as I could, and one of those experiences was volunteering for the RSPB, but on their youth advisory board. And that year, it was 2019, was the year of the publication of the State of Nature report, which is a huge report that's compiled every 3 years. And it basically reports on the state of nature, the health of it, what's going on. Here are some projects that are doing amazing things. But here is what's happening with the natural world in spite of those projects. And here's what needs to happen. And 2019 was a really landmark one because it was where the 1 in 7 species are at risk of extinction statistic came out, which is now 1 in 6 a few years on. And what was a cool thing they were doing that year was they were getting the RSPB steering group, the Youth Advisory Board, to basically launch that report and be the voice of its communication to the public. And on that launch day, the person who was coordinating it said, "Oh, the Metro wants an opinion piece, and we know that you enjoy writing, so would you be up for writing something like that?" And I was like, "Oh my God, like I've never written for anyone, like any newspaper that has a big audience." And so
Yeah, because people don't realise the Metro has the biggest audience.
Metro's enormous.
Yeah, 7 million people a day or something.
And a huge readership, and a really important one to reach because they are the public. They aren't necessarily vested in anything that the Metro communicates. And so if we want to preach beyond the choir about the environment and climate change, we need to be speaking to people who read, publications like that. And once I got over the whole like, well, why do they want to know what I think thing, I wrote what I thought, and I commented on the State of Nature report and how it made me feel and what I think should happen as a result of it.
Did you show that piece to anyone before you submitted it?
No, because I only had 2 hours to write it. So I got the thing at like 10 a.m. and they were lucky that I wasn't,
What was the word count?
Oh, like 900 words. And they were like, "Oh, could it be back by midday?" And I was like, yeah, sure. And I was like at my dad's, and I was like, well, good thing I'm not working today. And so I just kind of thought, well, what the hell, let's just give it a go. Didn't really have time. I think maybe I showed it to my dad. And then it was published by the afternoon. And then I was at work the next day or a few days later, and I got an email on my lunch break from this publisher, big publisher, not Bloomsbury, one of their competitors. And it said, "Oh, we saw this article and you write really differently in a really interesting way about nature. Have you ever thought about writing a book?" And I was like, "Oh." And I did the classic thing of like completely disowning and dismissing a piece of work that I was actually secretly really proud of. And I was like, "Oh yeah, I did." This is me typing. I was like, "Oh yeah, I did write that, but also I think you've got the wrong email because like I can't write a book. Like, no."
Why do you think that was your immediate reaction?
Well, I just thought like how old was I? I was like 22. I was like, you have to be a certain kind of person, maybe a certain age, the certain
You'd been
kind of
banging on the door for an opportunity. The door opened and said,
I
"Come
know.
on in."
Yeah, and I was like, "No, I can't." And I just thought you had, especially to write a book in the genre of nature and science and the environment, in this country especially, it's so beloved and so intimidating at the same time. And it's so closely guarded too by people who have made it such a beloved genre. And so it was terrifying to have the prospect of like, well, why would anyone want to know what I think? But then I thought, actually, come on, you've been wanting an opportunity. Let's play the game. So I did the game, which involved submitting a whole proposal for an idea. And you have to lay out the skeleton of the book in terms of the chapters. You have to suggest why your book might do well in the market, who your readers might be. Are there any similar books that might be competitors? And why you? Why should you be the writer for this story?
Were you like, you asked me? You should be like, no.
I know. You have to basically completely sell yourself. And so it was the strangest exercise. But the more I was going through it, the more I was like, actually, ooh, this feels like... Now someone's prodded me and said, what would you write? I thought, well, actually, I have... There could be something in this. And I ended up proposing what became the idea for Forget Me Not.
And did you have the title straight away, or did the title come late?
No, title. But they didn't end up wanting it because they didn't like the first person narrative, which was interesting. So they were looking to grow their non-fiction list, but they didn't want narrative. They wanted, I think, more of a coffee table kind of info book.
And was the first piece in the Metro in the first person?
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
Yeah, so it was
like,
interesting.
It's like going to a bakery, really liking their brownies and asking someone to make you some brownies. I'm not really into brownies.
Yeah, yeah. So it was hugely disappointing, and I think...
And did you think that was done at that point? You thought, oh, well, that's the opportunity.
But I needed that because it showed me that I really wanted it. And I had never encountered that before with anything that I had done in all my weird work experience and time, short time in the sector. I couldn't forget about it. And so I spoke to a friend of mine and she was like, well, why don't you just do what all the other people who want to write books do and see if any other publisher wants this? And I was like, well, okay, how do you do that? And so I did the classic stalking of publishers on Twitter, on LinkedIn. I realised that Bloomsbury had an amazing specialist non-fiction imprint called Bloomsbury Wildlife. And I found out who the right person, or who I thought was the right person to speak to on there. I sort of found out how you structure the Bloomsbury email address and just gave it a go. And emailed Jim and was like, oh, hello. I had the sort of secret weapon of being able to say a major publisher who's a competitor of theirs was interested, didn't want it in the end, but I don't suppose you like the sound of this. P.S. I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing here.
Did you genuinely put the PS on the bottom?
Probably, yeah.
That's transparency and honesty.
I was just like, I don't really know what's going on, but also, hi. And he invited me to London to meet the following week, and they signed me on. I love the idea of Forget Me Not. And we worked together on a bit more of a honed proposal.
How different was your first proposal to what the book became?
Not very at all. The title came once I got the commission, and I had a bit more of an idea as to the vibe of what it was going to be. But yeah, then the commission took a while because obviously it's a risk taking a nobody on, and to publish something under their massive name that is talking about important stuff. But
how long was the writing period from you having the skeleton to submitting a manuscript?
For Forget Me Not, about a year.
Okay.
So a year of writing and travelling, and then a year of production.
Sorry. And what was your process in terms of writing? When and how do you write?
Good question. I had absolutely no idea when I started. It was so intimidating. And the funny thing was is that I'd gone from just almost quite a low point, really, from finishing my master's to moving back home, working in retail, trying and trying and trying. At that point, I was doing all the interviewing for the jobs that I didn't get. And so I was feeling very demoralised. And also the commissioning process for the book was taking ages. And so I was starting to lose faith in that idea as well. And then all of a sudden, on the same afternoon, I got the green light for the book, and then also an offer of a job from Beaver Trust for my first proper job in conservation. And I was like, I need to go lie down. this is too much. But in terms of the writing process, it was really trial and error. I had no idea. I'd only ever written small pieces.
So you were learning and developing your process as you were playing the game.
And I remember emailing my editor once I'd been introduced to her, and I was like, so, like, how do you begin? How do I start? And she was like, what do you mean, how do you start? Just go, like, I'll chat to you when you're ready. And so I had to almost treat it like I would an expedition or an adventure. Or I was like, right, what do I need? What is my kit list? How can I thrive in like structure and routine and predictability, but in a weird way, unpredictability in like an expedition scenario, I really like, and I can kind of be a bit more focused there. But I had to sort of attack it in that mindset of like, I need to just make a plan here. And I had all these travels for the 10 species I wanted to see around the country. It was also COVID, which was frustrating, and added the curveball on the travel element that we hadn't put in the proposal, because obviously it wasn't a thing when I proposed it. But I started to get into the first chapter I wrote is interestingly the first chapter of the book, so the Marsh Fritillary, which was a jaunt down to Cornwall from Devon on the train and a bike ride. Fine. But when I look back at it now, it's a slightly bumpy first chapter when I read it back. It feels chaotic. And I think that's because I was chaotic, because I had no idea what I was doing. It was my first ever adventure with the goal of this becoming a chapter of a book that people might read. And it was very much making it up as you go along, like, okay, I should probably take some notes while I'm out here, so let's just note it down on my phone. And someone was like, oh, maybe do voice memos and capture like how you're feeling and like what the weather's like. So I tried that, and then I ended up not really liking that. And
you almost could have written a companion book that was like, this is my first book and this is my book of how to write your first book.
Yeah.
You could have written the two in parallel.
Such a subjective thing, like it's so personal. I don't think there's a recipe that works for everyone. And also along the side, I was trying to find experts to interview to help supplement the narrative. And so I would interview them over a call online, I'd record it, and instead of taking notes whilst they were speaking, I would watch it back. And some of these calls would be like 4 or 5 hours long, and I'd hand transcribe everything. And my friends were like, why don't you use software that like writes it for you? And I was like, well, but then I want to get the person behind the scientist. I don't want it to read like a report or an article. I want to get the body language, the tone of voice, the facial expressions, so that I can add a bit of colour to their personality when they're talking about butterfly decline or temperature heat waves and things like that. So there were all these spinning plates when I was making and kind of constructing the chapters. And by chapter 5, which is the trip to Orkney to see the black guillemot, I really felt like I found my rhythm with it in terms of the travel.
Did the writing essentially appear in sequential order?
Not necessarily. So I had to, some of the species I could only see in different seasons.
Because the nature was they were rare and elusive.
Yeah. And like for the mountain hare, I wanted to see it in winter. So I wrote them all out of order, apart from chapter 1, which was the first ever one I wrote. And chapter 5 did end up feeling like the midpoint in my research and writing and travel. And interestingly, Chris Packham, not to do a name drop, but when he read it, he was like, I really felt like you had found your rhythm at Orkney. And I was like, that's so interesting you say that, because mentally I had, and I felt more comfortable and more like, right, this is what the vision is for this book and this is what I need to do. Whereas the chapters before that were like, well, what's going on? But
we have a very own OC Chris Packham story that gets referenced a lot. So we, one of the estates we bought in Yorkshire, 500-acre Farmer Hill farm in Yorkshire, we're just about to buy it, and the phone goes from the selling agent going, can you legally confirm that I am not Chris Packham, and they've met me in person, that I'm not Chris Packham, nor am I affiliated with Chris Packham? And I'm like, we've met. Like, I'm 40 years old, I'm 100 plus kilos and 5'7". Chris is none of those things. Yeah, the sellers really think you're Chris Packham and won't let you buy it unless you confirm you're not Chris Packham. So we were about, yeah, we can legally confirm that. We happen to quite like Chris, but no, I am not Chris. There you go. And then we ended up meeting this neighbour on site later, and he went, yeah, I understand why people thought you were Chris. But I'm like,
Why?
in what way do we look similar in any way? So yeah, that's our very own Chris Packham story.
Yeah, not your doppelganger.
No, well, I didn't think so. Amazing chap. Not agreed. Not my doppelganger. Was the winter hare the most challenging?
No.
What was the most challenging species?
So there are lots of species that the whole like point of the book was that it's not about ticking off species and be like, yep, saw it, brilliant, well done me. It's more the thrill of the chase, and it goes back to that experiential kind of part of the natural world that I have always loved. And the trade-off with that is you don't always see stuff. And as I said, I'm not trained in how to look for stuff. In zoology, they don't tell you how to track animals, how to find stuff. So many misconceptions about zoology. It's just so much textbook learning. And a lot of learning happens kind of abroad. So you learn a lot about other countries and their nature, not so much about here. So I didn't actually know. I went in almost blind, deliberately and kind of coincidentally.
Such a feature, though. So you're disengaged, not your resistance to almost the intellectual arrogance of the Latin and the science and the inaccessibility of it, alongside your openness to adventure and not wanting to be the expert, allows you to communicate in a way that the experts can't. They can't make it accessible. I think that's what gives you the ability to tell unique stories in that way.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think it's more that like I wanted to learn along with the reader and us to be going on this journey together and to be surprised and delighted and shocked and saddened at the same time. Not me just be like, let me tell you how much I know.
Yeah.
And please react to it, by the way. So I think a lot of what comes as a result of that is failure of not seeing stuff and nature not performing on demand. And obviously I was looking for species that are incredibly rare and at risk and threatened. So who am I to expect them to just rock up when I want them to? It's important that we don't see them because it reminds us how fragile it all is. That being said, there were some species that really annoyed me because I really wanted to see them. And they're just really cool. And I'd heard loads of stories about them and people had been like, oh yeah, I've seen them, they're so amazing. And I hadn't seen them. The one that I had a love-hate relationship with the most was the Merlin, which is, I think, chapter like 9. And granted, they are incredibly rare. They're the smallest falcon in Britain, a handful of breeding pairs in the uplands and things and in coastal areas. And I don't know what I was thinking. I only had to parachute in. I was doing all this around my new job at Beaver Trust, so I had very little time to be in these wild places, which again was contrary to the nature books I'd read growing up, where they seemed to have endless time just wandering and roaming around. And
so we're friends with the producers at Silverback who work on Maybe I remember, and the months and months they commit to getting seconds of footage.
But that's slightly different because they're, I think, doing a huge public service in ultimately communicating stories we'll never know otherwise. But for like birders and twitchers who are able to, I'm just like, what do you do for work? How can you fund all these long trips? And like, do you not like have a job? And that's just, I think, my naive like 20-something brain thinking that. But I wanted to see this Merlin, but I didn't. I was roaming it was like a really weird heat wave in April. I got a sunburn. I was with a friend who's an amazing birder who helped kind of me see the landscape from the Merlin's point of view, which was really cool. But yeah, I didn't see them and they've eluded me ever since. And what's funny is that I still
not seen one.
Still not seen one, and I still get readers get in touch being like, hey, I saw a Merlin yesterday. And I'm like, bye. Please don't.
Yeah.
Great, I'm so happy for you. But one day I'd love to see one, but I kind of love that they've eluded me a bit because they've sort of teased me along. But they were the one species that I really struggled to find science on. And by science, I mean like peer-reviewed papers to help embellish what I was saying. and the gaps in the science allow me to explore more of like the folklore aspect of birds of prey and our very strangled relationship and history with birds of prey and falconry and things
I
like
love
that.
that attitude. One of my rules in business is when something challenging or bad happens, what is the opportunity this now gives us? It's exactly what you challenged.
All closed.
I haven't got
Haven't
this.
opened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love it. What was so we were at an amazing Beaver Trust event the night before your book launch.
Yes.
So you had a particularly busy week that week.
Yeah.
What was the process of launching your first book like? How did that feel? What was your experience?
It just felt a bit weird, really. I think when you're I think writing suits me because it's a very introverted, or it suits the introvert in many ways, because certainly for the books I've written, the writing process is about a year to 18 months, completely self-guided. No one but yourself is going to tell you to sit down and pummel the words out. And I loved that. I loved the kind of cavey, introverted writing stage because I could just do whatever I wanted.
And are people seeing anything during the process, or the first time someone reads it is when you hand over a full manuscript?
No, there are some. It changed actually from the first book to the second book, but I have a few like trusted readers who I would bounce ideas off of and just be like, oh, I'm not sure about this section. Could you just like sound it out for me, or easy as a sounding board? But
And do you pick the trusted reader based on the question mark you've got over it?
good question. If it's like a bit of science, I want to check whether I've got the right end of the stick.
Yeah.
I would send it to an expert. So for both books, I've interviewed loads of scientists. And so by default, all the scientists who are featured, up to like 70, they're all proofreaders for me before I submit the manuscript to Bloomsbury, because I need them to be happy with what I've said, how I've represented their work. Some of them, it's their life's work I'm reporting on, so it needs to be correct. So they're always really valuable proofreaders, and they're always really smart. So that's always very reassuring if I've got, green light from them. My parents are brilliant proofreaders. They are biased a little bit, but they're also very hard to please. And so they will tell me if they're not, if something's not working for them. And then, yeah, kind of that's it really. Parents and then scientists. So for me, that's enough. But I like to, it's very, and I don't know if you found this, but when you're in the early stages, it feels very delicate and very embryonic and very vulnerable to change. And that's a good thing, because you want to be able to feel quite loose with it. And if your brain's kind of telling you to go in a different direction that's kind of different to what you initially thought, it's quite good to run with that for a bit, see where it goes. But that's a very precious time, I think, is building the project. And then when it comes to launching it, I honestly feel like it's like you're in front of a room of people and you strip down and take all your clothes off and invite comment. It feels so exposing. And even though it's a book about nature and the environment, but because
It's also a book about you.
because I've written it, and it is in my voice, and it is written largely how I talk.
Do you prefer you when you speak or you when you write?
Me when I write.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think
Sometimes I hear myself speak, I'm like, why do I even speak? Why do I open my mouth?
You are very eloquent and a beautiful storyteller. So Penny will cut short some. So I don't listen to the podcast back because I've had the pleasure of having the conversation.
Interesting.
So and I don't like my voice. I forget I'm northern in my head.
Your skeleton.
Yes, otherwise it'd deafen you, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, especially northern.
It's how your bones receive your voice. So you're like, ooh, gross.
Yeah. So Penny will occasionally show me a short of something that is on the podcast, and I'll be like, I sound quite eloquent on that.
Yeah.
Whereas when I write, I prefer my written voice, I think.
Interesting.
But I think my phraseology comes out better when I talk. So my writing process was very different in that I didn't intend to write a book. So how do you think? How does a thought move through your head if you had to describe it? Good question, right?
Good question. I've never thought about that. fast and loose.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So descriptions of, we've got one board member, incredibly wise guy, but he thinks in what I would describe as long formed ways, but when he shares a thought, it's perfectly formed and complete and done. Our editor, who helps me with all my written content, Abby, she thinks like a tube map. It's linear with like straight lines and structure, whereas mine's like a firework display. If you give me an idea, it just shoots off in every direction, and I have to try and grab one of these themes. So I write because it keeps me on a theme and lets me explore. So across our work, we've had to develop a thought, an opinion, a position statement on hundreds of things, from species to trees to buying land to data to recruitment to each of these things. Like, well, what is the OC position on that? Because we're not even 4 years old yet. We didn't exist as a company. So everything we had to start from scratch. So when I want to really deep dive into something and understand what I think about it, I write about it. And that becomes 1,000 words.
You find it cathartic? Does it help distill?
Yeah, so it focuses me on it so my brain doesn't disappear off elsewhere. And you know, we've done hundreds of thousands of miles seeing different estates and things. So often I'll write, I don't get travel sick, so I write in the car. So if we're traveling somewhere, I'll sit and write. And I've never met anyone else who does that.
Well, sometimes I've had no choice.
Yeah.
Like for, time.
Yeah.
Just got to bash it out. But
I love this.
yeah.
For those of you just listening, Sophie's repeatedly typing. It's like infinite.
I'm playing the piano.
Yeah. So it was written in parts and parts, and it was like, oh God, we've got 90,000 words of the first chapter of OC. And we were going to go, right, well, we'll just publish this on a digital ebook on our website. And then our friends at Triodos, who are amazing people and we've collaborated with, said, no, we'd really like to publish that for you. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then it goes into that production stage of a year. So I went through probably 6 months of being sick to the back teeth of it. So I'm like, well, I've finished that. I've moved on. And I've pretty much finished book 2 now, sat there waiting before book 1 goes. But we can't show 2 to anyone because 1 hasn't gone yet. And we want to be respectful for the Triodos being, love you guys, thank you for helping launch this. That's going to come out in June. Did you go through any love or hate with it in that period before it launched?
Not hate.
Actually, that's not fair. I don't mean love, hate. I mean love and disinterest, probably. I was just like,
Yeah, probably. I think it was more, not impatience, but there was a lot of terror and a lot of imposter syndrome, because once it started to feel less like a long Word document and more like a physical book, then came the fear of like, oh no, like I want people to read this, but also I really don't want people to read this. And what does this mean? And what have I done? And like, what if this does nothing? What if this does nothing for these species and their plight? And what if this, does nothing for my career? Because I wrote it when I was 25. I was still living at home. I was hoping that this might open a few doors and get me out the home and actually into something that could give me a future in the sector that was perhaps more aligned to my skill set. And I was finally realising what my skill set might be after years of not really knowing. And but yeah, so much fear. But I think fear can drive in a really, if you embrace fear as a kind of motivator and let it have its moment in short bursts, it can kind of propel you forward. Yeah, again, like in sport, fear is a really important part of sport and strength, and you never know if you don't try. So
when you did sort of book launch things, did you do reads of sections of it?
Yeah.
How did that feel?
Terrifying.
Yeah.
Because I love, and what was I recorded the audiobook, and I'm about to do it again for the next one in a couple of weeks. It was such like a sort of mind-bending experience to have grown up listening to story tapes for years.
You were maybe more excited about the audiobook, were you?
It was the best week of my life, because I could hide behind the microphone and not have cameras and not worry about like anything, but I could you do end up really performing. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm doing an audiobook, like this is amazing.
Did you have mental moments of congratulations where you hit a particular line you liked and was like, that's a nice line, as you're moving back through?
Yeah, you do. And or you spot mistakes still, because I remember my English teacher was always like, if you want to truly edit your own work, read it out loud.
It's so hard to do. You get snow blindness. You don't see your own
once
things.
you're reading it and quiet, you're like, yeah.
I always remember my PhD Viva. So when you do a PhD, you have to go and argue with the examiners, and they want a back and forward debate. And the external examiner, so they lost my thesis for like 6 months, and I'd moved on and got a job and things like that. So a year later, they call you back in to debate this thing. You're like, I've been working for a year. I don't care. It's done.
Yeah.
It's like, I've never been more excited to read a thesis that promised so much, and then being completely depressed and I was reading it on a plane. So it was the worst experience ever because it was laden with errors and typos and things like that. And I'm like, yeah, I couldn't see them by the end.
Yeah, you just can't.
No.
You really can't. And obviously that's why it's great to have an editor. But...
I write too fast as well. If I get really excited, I just miss entire words.
Yeah.
I just skip them. So Abby, who edits all my stuff now, she's like, it's really fun because it's like a game. I get to decide which word Rich meant to write here before he did.
Nice.
So yeah, very chaotic on the first draft.
Yeah. Oh, but that's what I mean, is that it's a very delicate, precious manuscript, and that's such an important part of the whole project, because that's where your idea was forming, and that's kind of the beginning of something, and then you finesse it, you kind of nip and tuck things. And
I think you might be the first person who's ever associated the word delicate with anything I've done, which was lovely. I'll take that. So book 1 lands, which sits on my bookshelf. So I have a copy.
No way.
Very beautiful. Received well straight away into number 2. What was the process for getting the commission, the nod for number 2 after number 1?
Oh, I was like done with book writing at the end of book 1. I was exhausted. It is exhausting. I don't know if you find that. People underestimate the physicality of putting these things together, and like mental energy is so draining on the body.
This gives me an opportunity to say thank you, Abby, for being... I'm not having to do this, right? So I had to do the first... I wrote the content, but the producing together is Abby, and our marketing team was incredible. So she's carried the burden for that.
It's exhausting. And like, I think people have this kind of cushy, cozy image of authors where they're just sort of sat in a cafe, having like loads of coffee, maybe a glass of wine, just like bashing out a few words, being all sort of frivolous. But it is a grind, and especially tackling big topics that can be depressing and difficult to digest yourself, let alone trying to translate them into something that's going to mean something for a random reader you've never met and will never met.
Do you have a reader in mind when you write?
Oh, good question again. For Forget Me Not, I wanted that particular book to be the book that I wish I had read when I was like getting into all of it. Knew I was interested in nature, but thought I had to have a certain level of skills and experience in naturalism to qualify for that interest. So I don't know whether I've achieved that, but certainly I felt that millennial age groups were underrepresented as a target audience, because it's really easy to get kids excited about nature, and it's really easy to get people over a certain age group who may enjoy watching Springwatch, Countryfile, that sort of thing, because they perhaps have more time and resources to feed that interest. Whereas you've then got people in their late teens, 20s, early 30s who are politically engaged, environmentally curious, ambitious career-wise, and want to do something but don't really know like what's for them out there that they might be able to do, or there's content there that just isn't quite sparking their interest, it's not meeting their demands. So I wanted Forget Me Not to kind of be that for people who maybe have never picked up a nature book before. So I had a couple of my cousins in mind who are cooler than me, like trendier. I mean, even that makes me sound so old, but who says trendy? But I think I wanted, they had never been interested in what I do or what I'm interested in. We'd never shared those interests. They've always been kind of like, oh, cute, you love the outdoors, that's nice. So I was like, right, I need them to be in my head when I'm writing.
I love the change in inflection of your voice when you went, right.
Right.
We're going to deal with this then. And then book 2?
Book two is very different. It's like,
and was that new approaching? Is it the same publisher?
Same publisher,
Did you approach them, or they said, let's go again now?
They were asking if I had ideas like as soon as Forget Me Not came out, and I was like, no.
That's got to feel good for the ego, though.
It did feel good, but
if you're not knocking on a door anymore, they're calling you.
No, but then it's never, it's never certain. I could be cautiously optimistic about collaborating.
You had the previous one where they said, no, we want this, bring it on, and then...
So I did submit another idea to Bloomsbury, And they really liked it, but they were like, there are other similar books coming out that you don't know about yet, but that we know about internally that are along the same themes. So I took a bit of a break and I was like, oh, I only want to write something that is going to matter and mean something. I didn't want it to be like a passion project. I didn't want it to be another narrative that was a little bit memoir-y, and I'd done that with Forget Me Not, where I'd linked some bits of childhood memories and stuff. I wanted it to be more serious and more grown up. And I felt like I'd honed the craft of my style a bit more by that point. And so, yeah, I didn't force myself to think of an idea. It just kind of came when it was ready, and I think when I was ready. And so I'd always been interested in parasitism at university and how, like, parasites govern all species who have a parasitic lifestyle make up 50% of the world's biodiversity. And I just thought it was mad that you have these species that can evolve to entangle their lives with another completely different species for survival. And that makes up an unbelievably disproportionate amount of the living things on this planet. And I actually accepted and then rejected a research master's in parasitology at Bristol. I was fascinated by it, but then I was like, what do I do if I just know loads about worms? I was like, I'll love it for a year and then I'll be back at square one where I'm like, do I want to be a dentist? Do I want to be a physiotherapist? Do I want to be a pilot? I don't know. So that study of symbiosis and symbiotic relationships has always fascinated me. But then it was only when I started to really give that a bit of time in my head and I was like, well, the only places I've really encountered symbiosis have been kids' books or textbooks. There's not really a up-to-date narrative on what is symbiosis, what does it mean for our planet, what does it mean for us, what can we learn from it, and what might climate change be doing to it, this ancient form of survival. And so when I pitched it to Bloomsbury, they were very quick to recognise that there was a gap for this kind of book and this topic. And so it sort of happened quite quickly from there. But it's a very different, it's written in a similar style to Forget Me Not, but it's almost like Forget Me Not's much darker, twisted cousin.
Oh, the publicist would love that line. That's brilliant. That's got to be on the press release for it, surely.
It's on the top.
Nice, nice.
No, it's not.
Oh, it really
somewhere, or I don't know. I'll try and remember it. But
really
it's a more sciencey book. It's yeah, I think maybe more mature.
And what's the timeline on that?
Well, overall,
in terms of release, are we out yet?
8th of May.
8th of May.
Yeah. So we're kind of just bubbling into publicity for it now.
And do you have is launch event scheduled and planned, and what does that look like?
Yeah, so we're doing, we're very lucky, we've had a lot of support so far. Doing like a launch event in Exeter, where I live, with my local independent bookshop, who did the launch for Forget Me Not, so it's really nice to bring that back. And then I'm doing a London launch event at Covent Garden at Stanford's the day after, on publication day. And then just kind of touring around all the festivals and whoever wants to talk about parasites, really. So I'm doing Hay in May, and then lots of indie bookshops, which is really nice. But yeah, we'll see. It's still figuring it out, but I'm also slightly terrified of the whole taking your clothes off thing again.
So I can't think anything worse than reading a section of mine. So we've got a launch event in June. Very fortunate. I've got to say thank you to a lot of people. So we're going to use sort of a gallery venue in Bristol rather than a bookshop to fit everyone in. So I'm not. People are listening to this, so my opinions might not matter, and it might get completely changed out of my hands. Elle's downstairs, so she might go, no, that's not what we're doing. But I'm hoping it's a back and forth conversation about it rather than it is me reading any bits.
Oh my gosh, in conversation with is the best.
Thank you.
That
sounds official.
I have said no to so many places who will not do in conversation with, or I've said, yeah, really happy to do it, I'd love to do it, but can we please make it in conversation with? Because no one wants to hear a monologue from me.
That's what I think
and
too.
Also then I worry that I'm assuming what the audience will find interesting.
Yeah.
Because I've made up the talk. Whereas if you do in conversation with, it's like this. So it's up to someone else to represent the interests of the audience and to try and communicate that. It's just so much more interesting and engaging to watch.
100%.
And it's so much more comfortable for you because it's I find it quite an overwhelming experience to then just be like, hey, like I've written this and it's about this and please buy it. No.
Love it. What comes next?
What comes next? Chill. No, I've had like a much like more healthy work-life balance since submitting the book. So again, I wrote to have or to hold throughout working, and I completely burnt out. And
What does that look like?
Just exhaustion. And like I was traveling for this book again, low carbon travel. Again, I like to make it hard for myself and think, well, can I make this into like a big bike ride? Can I make this as kind of adventurous as possible to still try and represent that part of experiencing nature? And also as a test to see, well, can I get to this place on public transport? Is it easy? Is it feasible? Is it doable? So that was tiring. And also it just happened that I had a lot of extreme weather when I was traveling for this book. So pretty much every trip was accompanied by a named storm. Not joking, I name drop so many storms in this book because it's like, oh, I go to Ireland and it's Storm Ciarán, and I go here and it's Storm Agnes. But that was an important story in itself because I started to think, well, why were there so many named storms throughout the year, not necessarily in storm season? So climate is revealing change more pertinently and unexpectedly. But yeah, burnout was invisible until you sort of don't get a handle on it, or I didn't recognize it at first until I started to just feel like done. And then it was affecting like other work, like my relationships, my interest in doing stuff outside of work, because I was writing constantly at the weekends and the evenings, and the immersion of that intensity served me well, I think, in the book, because it allowed me to enter this very chaotic, strange world of symbiosis. So I'm grateful for that. But
It's like method acting, but method
in a
writing.
way, you almost have to like become the worm or become the parasite and try and get in their head, and then they get in your head, and then, you know, I was honestly like having dreams about sentences and some of these species, and I would solve sentences in my head that were causing me issues in my dream, and then I'd wake up and be like, well, I can't remember that, can I? I had a really great idea in my dream, but I can't remember it. So I was kind of going a bit mad. And
in the end, we're all insane.
Yeah. Yes.
Sophie, you've been an incredible guest. Thank you so much. I think one of the most unique perspectives on the world and experience we've come across. So it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you. No, in the most beautiful way.
Oh, thank you.
My favourite question is what we always end a podcast on. What's the one question I haven't asked you wish I had?
Maybe like, why now? Like, why write these things now? Why talk about them now?
Why now, Sophie?
Why now? Because the world is hurting. Leaders aren't making the right decisions, or if they are, they're not happening quickly enough. And there are so many untold stories that people need to know that are happening right under our nose. And I think art is not celebrated enough in partnership with science. And so I hope that by, especially with To Have or To Hold, bringing these stories and these species as characters might help illuminate maybe a path forward to connection to nature that we maybe haven't thought about.
I hope so too. Thank you. I've adored every minute of our time together.
Thanks for having me.